Hello, welcome back to Pasadena Independent School District's STAAR-chitecture PD e-training. Let's review your task. You were to generate ideas and complete the insider chart using the following prompt. Write about boundaries. Take a stance on whether or not school personnel and students should maintain communication on social media. First, you were to generate a list of topics and ideas. Those topics and ideas could relate to boundaries, school personnel and students, relationships, and social media. Next, you were to identify examples related to historical and/or personal events, literary, pop culture, and/or sports. Finally, before drafting, you were to work on thesis statements. Usually, one or two thesis statements will work. More than that if you have other ideas. Let's take a look at some of the things you possibly talked about in your insider chart. For topics and ideas, you may have made connections to communication between school personnel and students being appropriate or inappropriate. You may have discussed those things or thought about those things in your head. Professionalism, privacy, relationships, trust, friendship, influence, and perception. For a historical example, you may have included information from the First Amendment. In terms of personal events, you may have made a connection to being limited or very open with talking to adults. For myself, it was limited communication with adults, so that's what I listed. For the literary category, you may have listed a book or movie. I put Little House on the Prairie as one of the books. I remember different rules and considerations that were made when children were being addressed and when adults were being talked to by children. And similarly, The Boy Next Door is a movie that I've seen that talks about kind of broaching that line in terms of communication between adults and children. Pop culture, I could talk about Kylie Jenner and her relationship with an older adult, which some people deem inappropriate, some people deem appropriate. And then there's sports, which again, because I'm not a sports person, I was unable to think of any ideas for that. But again, because all of the categories don't have to have something, that's okay. So you may have listed similar ideas or ideas that were connected to the prompt, and those are acceptable, of course. And finally, there are working thesis statements on the right. Students should not possess the freedom to communicate with personnel on social media or school personnel on social media. And the second working thesis statement is access to school personnel on social media promotes higher risk for inappropriate relationships. So both of the thesis statements have the same perspective, but they vary slightly. Okay, let's take a look at a draft. Because you created a draft, I can show you a possible draft and you can compare. Notice that there are bolded words, and those words again are linked directly to the topics and ideas column because we want to utilize vocabulary that creates cohesion in our draft, and the more topics and ideas that we can include, the more connected our essay will be. Now you may pause and read the essay and take time to compare it to your draft to see what's similar and what's different. When you resume, we'll take a look at getting students to generate connected introductions and conclusions. Welcome back. Now we're ready to look at introductions and conclusions. We know that introductions and conclusions are an expected part of an essay that lends itself to acclimating the audience to the topic and then leaving them with something to think about at the end. They should be connected. A lot of times students are not sure what's appropriate for an introduction and conclusion, so they begin with a thesis statement and they write their paper, and generally they will not include a conclusion. A lot of times students will stop when they're done supporting their last idea. So we want to teach them to be able to utilize introductions and conclusions effectively. If you'll notice below, there is a chart. There is a thesis statement, and there are two types of introductions and conclusions: compare and contrast, and anecdotal. I'll give you the opportunity to review, so you may pause here, and when you return, we'll talk about next steps.